Hi there, it's Laura again from Laura's Sewing School in Arlington, Massachusetts, and Sewing Genius on YouTube. So I should have been like those cooking shows where you have one that's part way, one that's part way. Well, I just don't want to waste any of that fabric since I plan to do it with something else. So I wanted to show you how I pinned this, okay? So I have a pin every time I'm going to come to a stripe where there's a high contrast. I put a pin in the stripe where the colors change and make sure it comes through the other side in exactly the same place, okay? These are patchwork pins, so these are really fine. They're glass head. They're really fine, so it's a little easier to go over them. Don't hit them with a needle because they will go karate chop into the hole of your throat plate, especially if you're using an zigzag throat plate versus a single hole throat plate. Now, of course, it turns out that the tracks of, say, a Singer Featherweight or the older sewing machines are deeper and they go over pins more easily, but you can still really damage a needle or damage the pin if you when you go over them. I find I get close to it and I hit the needle up, needle down button, or I turn the hand wheel toward me to get over that pin. The pin staying in there will keep the stripes from slipping. So I'm just going to go like this and slide these out with my thumb. It's a really easy way to do that. And then I'll just suck them up with my magnetic pin cushion. See? Very nice little sewer's trick. Now I'm going to press the seam open. Okay? So I don't know if you'll be able to see me from over there off to the side, but I'm just going to go like that and set the what do you call them? Set the stitches, lock them in place. And now here, you know, usually when you have two different types of corners, you like I said earlier, you crisscross them where the seam allowance is going to be. But I needed to match the stripes. So that looks pretty darn good, doesn't it? And the corners are a little funky, but I'm just going to cut off this dog ear here and cut off the dog ear here, and it'll work just fine. So let me just press this from the front, make sure that that's really flat. That's going to make it really hard to see those. Now, I didn't match it as well as I usually would, but I still think it's pretty darn good. And when you've got that on your binding, you're not going to really notice that seam. And when the next seam is done, it's going to be parallel to the stripes. So you're really not going to notice the seams in your binding. You would really notice your seams in the binding if this was jogged. So you always want to, when you make that square and you're going to sew two edges together, do it where the stripes meet up first, because no matter what, this is going to work, okay? Now, the idea with continuous bias binding, and let me just take and get rid of these dog ears. Okay, there's that. And this one. That just makes it nicer. Continuous bias binding. I love doing continuous bias binding. It's just, I think it's so awesome. Now look at that. That mat is probably a little small for me to do this because we're going to be cutting along the bias and I don't want to have to move this thing. So I guess I will just use the mat that's on the table here. Sorry. And put that stuff over there, get it out of the way. So the thing is, I need to make marks for my stitching line. And so what I'm going to do, you've stitched across the grain of the fabric already, matching the stripes. The next seam is going to be between here and way over here. Okay, that's really hard to do. I mean, look at that. It's so twisted. But we need to do that to create a spiral. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be kind of like this. So you'll have a continuous, actually, that's going to be offset. Sorry. It's going to be kind of like this so that you will cut and do a spiral. But that's a big pain in the butt to mark all the lines, offset them, and then cut them afterwards. And then when you're trying to sew this edge to this edge, it's kind of a twisty, difficult thing to do. It doesn't want to behave for you. So I actually pre-cut the center of the strips before I sew this end to this end. Okay, the strips are going to be going on the bias. It's nice and easy to see with the stripes what is the bias, because the bias is a 45-degree angle to the grain lines, which go this way. Now what's great about that is that it gives you stretch on the bias, and it will go around curves and it wears better. So this is why we do this, okay? Now I'm going to mark on the wrong side of the fabric, okay? I would have gotten a smaller ruler, but I don't want to leave the camera. Okay, so I'm going to go like this. Now this is actually kind of hard to see. I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Yeah, it turns out that it's right where the purple and the white come together here. Let's see about here. I usually do a 3/8 on bigger pieces because I just feel better about that size seam allowance when I'm doing bias binding, or like if I do bias piping for a home deck project, I do 1/2 inch. But anyway, so I'm going to, this one you will see, I sharpen the pencil so it's very pointy, and I draw that line. Now, why do I use a pencil? I mean, I do, if you don't want to use something that's going to disappear with the iron when you make these next sets of marks, because you're going to be pressing them, and the marks that we do across on the bias are marks that are going to need to be there after we press this seam open. All right, so you could use a Frixion pan here. If it's really dark, I tend to use like a chacoliner. My favorite is made by Clover, and it's a little tube that looks like a lipstick cover. And that's the best one of the chacoliners because it does not get jammed up at the bottom. Okay, so that's the one I prefer. I couldn't find it to show you. It's somewhere here. Someone was using it yesterday, and I can't remember where it got put. Okay, so the thing is, I could like go like this, but sometimes I find that that's not accurate enough, which is kind of funny, I suppose. But I like to use a gridded mat. Okay, now when I'm doing, you need a ruler that's longer than the bias length here. Okay, so I had cut a 15.5 inch square. That's the size of my, no, 15-inch square, because that was the size of that square ruler that I was using earlier. And so yeah, I decided I'm going to do a 1.5 inch strip. Okay, now what's nice about this 1.5, this is a 1.5 inch wide ruler. That can be very helpful if you know the width of your ruler. Okay, a lot of times my longer rulers are 2 inches wide, but this is again that one that has a non-slipped on there. So I'm going to go like this, and I'm going to put this end on, I put this along a grid line on the mat. I like to have a mat that's longer than what I need to cut here. All right, I'm jumping around. I hope this doesn't hurt your understanding. So I'm going to go like this, and like I said, I'm going to hold this here and then pivot that and set it down when it's right where I want it. Now I'm going to draw toward the end. I'm going to draw this way, drag the pencil. I'm going to drag the pencil this way to be able to just have enough line so when I sew this edge to this edge and press it open, I can just cut across to connect where I've already cut in the middle. Okay, this will make more sense once you watch this whole video. This uses some of what they show in a lot of the continuous bias binding thing, but I added cutting the center of these strips almost to the seam line so that it's much easier to put those seams together, those edges together, sew them, and then I press the seam open and I cut across to connect the cuts I do in the middle. Okay, this makes it so much easier to handle, and then you don't have to, like usually they say draw your lines, sew this end to this end, offsetting it one strip, and then they say okay, when you're done, then you have to cut all of those. Well, how are you going to cut them when they're in a tube? You're either going to have to cut with the scissors, which isn't all that great, or take a small ruler and cut a little bit, move the tube, cut a little bit, move the tube. Big pain in the butt. Okay, so I'm trying to take away that pain in the butt. Okay, now once I've got this and I drew at each end, I'm going to hold this and I'm going to cut across that middle. Okay, and it seems like it cut pretty well. I was worried that maybe my my cutter had a nick in it, but it seems like it's behaving. I'm going to lift that up. Now I always cover what I want, the good stuff. So this is good. I don't want to like go like this and cut this way, because then I'm cutting into a strip that's, you know, attached to that one. I'd rather make my mistake. See, I've got this on the number 3 line on the mat. Ooh, I don't want to move my fabric though. So I've got this, and I'm going to set that down on my number 3 line. All right, I'm going to press firmly so I don't move the fabric. I also don't put the pencil straight up and down. I go like this and drag it like this. I go over here and drag it like this. I'm not pressing really hardly. Like, see, I just barely dent my finger. That's about how hard I press. I don't press real hard. And you'll find that it gives a better mark if you go like this and like this. If you go like this, you might catch the edge of the fabric and rumple it up, and you don't want to do that. Now I've made my marks at each end. I'm going to put my fingers like this so I can put my pressure over farther part of the ruler than if I, go like, you don't want your knuckles in the way. So I have it raised up a little bit. I never go past my fingers because my hand is acting like a pivot point on the ruler. So if I'm here and I go like this, you can see how I'm pushing against the ruler and forward, so it makes the ruler turn. I always put the blade side. You see, I call this the blade side because there's more depth on this side than this side, and I just feel like I can get a better cut that way. I don't like to cut this way, okay? So, all right, so then that was there. Now I'm gonna cut, basically put this on the line I just cut because I'm doing 1.5 inch strips, okay? Now, if I was doing a really big piece, my mat here is numbered and also marked in like 1/8 of an inch on each end. And I would put the ruler on the mark I needed here and the mark I needed here, because a lot of times I'll do 2.25 or 2.5 inches, and I don't have a ruler that's that wide, okay? And I can't base it on the marks near here because of, it's just not gonna work for me, so I match it to the marks here. So I have a 60-inch ruler that I use for that I love, okay? Now I'm gonna do, this is for ooh, did you hear that? It kind of chiggered and it made a little mark like this because I pushed too hard with the pencil. Okay, so now I'm going to go like this, stop, slide my hand, stop. I'm sliding my hand because this ruler just does not move, which is awesome. Okay, now that was 4.5. Now I'm going to do 6. So this side of the ruler is going to be on the mark, and I'm going to drag that toward the edge. And I'm going to go here, and it's just a number 2 pencil, no special pencil, okay? But I always sharpen it right before I use it. I want a very precise line. Now to get to 7.5, I'm gonna put this side of the ruler on the 6th line. So this is just happens to be that I'm making it so that the ruler is the same width as the strips I'm cutting, so that makes it a little easier. Ooh, see, there's something about that end. Maybe because it's getting more to the point and this is more flexible, that it's moving a little bit. So you have to be thinking about that. So cut, stop, see, like that. And then I'm going to lift that up. Things are still looking good. And then this is going to be, this side is on this line for 9, I think it is. Yeah. And it turns out this is not big enough for me to go a 1.5 inch strip. So I'm going to cut the whole thing, okay? Because I can't use that partial strip that's not 1.5 inches, okay? When you're making your figuring, when you're doing your formula for figuring out how big a square you need for this, the formula, I'll try and put this into the original description. I have to do that on the computer. But let's say I need, like what was it, on the quilt that I'm making right now, it was 72 inches on 2 sides and 76 inches on 2 sides. So it made it just under 300 or around 300. So yeah, it was like 296 or something like that. So I said, you know what? I like to pad it because I might have a strip like this that I can't use. And if I make exactly what the area is, I could end up this would be part of the area, but it's not usable for the width that I need. So I always pad what I need to do. I always want more. Plus, when you have your corners, you do folds. You do a little miter, so you're taking up some space. When you do these seams, you're taking up space. When you're doing the final seam between the ends of your binding, you're doing a seam. So I always like to pad it, so like I said, 300. Oh, well, what would be 320? Okay, so 320, I did times 2.5 or whatever, it ended up being 800, and I did square root, and it ended up being like 28 point something inches for the square. I said, well, I don't want a 28 inch square because it might not be enough. It might end up with an odd strip I can't use, and then I'm going to be messed up. So I ended up saying I have enough fabric. I'm going to bump it up to at least 32 or something like that for a square. And then it turned out that I was given 36 inches in the kit. And like I said, there was a a mark on the fabric. So I said, okay, well, I have enough. I'll do about 34-inch square on that fabric. So you got to know that you're going to have some waste that you didn't plan on, because I have no idea. I suppose there's a mathematical formula, but who's going to want to do that to figure out, you know, what's the most optimum amount? So now I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strips. Okay. Now the thing is, the idea, let's say that this is A and this is B. A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay, so we have A, B, C, D, E, F. I do not want to sew the end of A to itself. I will end up with rings. I want to do a spiral. So I want to sew the end of A to the end of B, the other end of B to the end of C. So it's going to be like, I can go A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E, and E to F. So I can get a spiral. Now, how do I decide which end is not going to be sewn into that spiral? You'll notice that there are seams here and here very close to the end. I don't want to sew this end of A to B because I will have a seam and a seam. I would rather sew this end of A to B here because there will be a greater distance from there. And so it turns out A to B, B to C, C to D, C to D to E, E to F. I'm going to cut off this bit that's left like this and have that be free. And it's going to be the opposite end down here, which is great because those are both have a seam near them. So that means I have 5 ends to sew together here and 5 ends to sew together here. So already this is making it easy because I've cut away what I don't need. Okay, now I have to sew the right side of this to the right side of that. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to lift this up, and I'm going to put these 2 edges together. Now you'll see this sits much more easily than when I tried to fold these edges together offset before I cut it. Looks almost like a pretty decoration, doesn't it? So this means that we're going to sew exactly the ends that we need together. Now, I know that a 1/4 inch was right where the purple and the white meet. So I'm going to match that to this line right here. Now, do you see the X that forms? You can't necessarily see the X here because the stripe is forming the X. I want to match those edges, those X's. So I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to stick it right through here and see if it comes. It didn't come out where I wanted it to. So I'm going to lift this off the pin and stick it right through the center of that X here, okay? I'm going to stand this up. The first one's always the hardest to do. I'm going to stand this up vertically and match these cut edges. I'm going to stand that up vertically like this. Pinch the fabric and rotate the pin to stick it through. We're going to end up sewing across these pins so nothing shifts. I don't want those cuts to be off. So then, once I get that first one, I can then put this down here and see if we can have this crisscross right where, this is what we would do if we had colored fabric for that first seam, just solid fabric. Okay, I'm going to go like this and put a pin in so that this, where the white and the purple come together, crisscrosses with this, see this, the line? That line goes right to that crisscross. So when I open it up, it will be one smooth edge. The hard part when you have 2 corners that are different is a lot of people think you match the corners. You don't match the corners, you match the intersection of the seam. Okay, so this is really close. I'm going to leave that in that intersection below and put it through this intersection where that X is. Now I'm going to go like this, stand that pin up directly, straight up and down, pinch it nearby and put that through. Now, why do I pinch it? If I have space between my layers and I don't pinch it, when I tip the pin, when it's going straight up and down, when I tip the pin, my layers become uneven, okay? But if I have the layers right next to each other, that acts like one pivot point, and when you move the pin, it doesn't move the layers. That's about the best analogy I can give you visually. Okay, so now I'm going to take this, put these together, and you know, hopefully 1 or 2 of these when you put it in the intersection on the front. Oh, that's even better. I'm getting better at this. See, it's almost there. That's not close enough. I'm going to lift that off and put it right in that X, see? Then stand this straight up and down, pinch that together and rotate the pin. Now I only have 2 spots left, so this is, at least the small one's pretty fast. And I'm going to, okay, now that's off, okay? So I'm gonna lift this up off the pin from underneath and put that through the X. Okay. Stand that up and down. Whoops, got to stand it up and down. Now sometimes, no matter how careful you are, and I'm very careful, I try to be really accurate, there's a little bit of extra space on that lower side, but you know what? The feed dogs will ease it in. Plus, if I pull on it a little bit, that disappears, okay? Now I just have to do this last bit and make those match up. Now, one advantage here is I am going to sew. I've decided, okay, let me get this all set. I'm going to sew on this side because this side, if I sew on this side and it wobbles a little on this side, this is so much white, no one will notice if I move this way or that to the stripe. But here the stripes are so close together, I'm going to aim for the same place the whole way so that you don't see the purple coming in and out of the seam line, okay? So, you know, and again, where it's uneven, you can see it's a little uneven between this one and this one. I'm just going to pull, and look at how that takes care of that, and pull as I go through. I'm going to go over the pins carefully, and then when I'm done, I'm going to bring this to the sleeve board. It's a little ironing board. You could put a towel through here, but that would stick a lot. I'm going to put it through the sleeve board. I'm going to put it on my arm usually, then slide it on the sleeve board. I'm going to press that seam open. Of course, the pins will be taken out. And then as I lay it on the sleeve board, making sure none of these edges are underneath each other, I'm going to cut along these lines, and I will have one long continuous piece of bias, okay? So I'm going to take a break and sew this, and then I'll take you over to the ironing board and show you how to cut, press and cut, and then I'm going to show you how you fold it right sides together and prep it for getting it on the quilt or whatever project you're going to do, okay?